You're listening to Don't Waste Water.
There are so many great opportunities in the water sector today. There are more great companies to invest in than there are investors willing to invest today.
Hello, bonjour, and welcome to the Don't Waste Water podcast.
I would not do an investment without having a belief that every company have at least a 10x opportunity and that at least one or two of the companies in the portfolio, of which there are 24, can achieve a 100x outcome.
I'm your host, Antoine Walter, and in today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Peter Yolles as my guest.
I do think there are opportunities for 100x outcomes. That's one of the reasons why I like to invest so early in the life of a company. If we invest at, let's say, a $5 million valuation, and we quote, only need to achieve a $500 million exit valuation, right? For that 100x outcome. I think that's eminently doable.
Peter is managing partner at Echo River Capital.
The 20th century centralized water and wastewater systems are going to collapse under their own weight. We already have 260,000 water main breaks every year, and it costs $1 or $2 million per mile to replace these pipes. We're not on a sustainable trajectory to replace and repair these pipes. So new cities, new industries, new residential housing developments, 21st century architecture and engineering will be done on the edge in these decentralized environments because the centralized systems of yesterday are not capable of building this out or treating the new emerging contaminants. They're not designed for that.
Echo River Capital invests globally in early-stage water technology companies to digitize, decarbonize, and decentralize the water cycle, what Peter calls the 3Ds of water tech.
Where stochastic analysis does not fit the future anymore. And we have to create a new world because the pace of change is accelerating. That means the pace of solutions needs to accelerate as well. And I do think that there will be an increasing appreciation for and valuation of companies that are creating the water-related solutions of the future in a way that we can't quite envision just yet.
And before we start, let me thank my sponsors, Simple Lab and Bluefoot Membranes. 100x. You heard it right in Peter's opening quotes. He believes that as a way to build his investment portfolio, 2 out of roughly 25, so say 8% of his invested companies can achieve a 100x, and that the 92% other ones have a 10x potential. And not only that, but also that this 10x or 100x will happen within the time frame of Echo River Capital's investment fund, so 10 years. So to be clear, this means 2 main hypotheses. First, that a company can go from an early stage, say seed round, to an exit within 10 years in water tech, and second, that it can do that in such a rapid growth fashion that it reaches those said multiples. Now, if we forget the word water in water tech, there are examples of companies that did that and much more. Between Apple's seed round in 1978 and its IPO in 1980, Arthur Rock, who was one of the 2 VCs in that round, turned his $57,600 investment into $21.8 million, hence achieving a nearly 400x return in 3 years. And if you think that's impressive, look at Sequoia Capital's investment in Yahoo. They poured $1 million for 25% of the company in 1995, and 3 years after the IPO in 1999, those shares were worth about $8 billion, hence achieving an 8,000x return in just 4 years. eBay, Google, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Uber, or Zoom are some more examples that a 3-digit x return in under a decade is absolutely achievable in tech. But if we bring back water in water tech, well, the picture changes. If you recall my quest to find any VCs in the history of water tech that achieved 10x or more, what I found out at the time is that the closest to Peter's target would be Gradient, with a potential over 200x for its first VCs, to be nuanced by the fact that Gradient neither exited nor IPO'd, so that's a paper valuation, not an actual return. And if we limit the quest to those actual returns, my closest contenders were Nano H2O, with what I estimated to be a 6x return investment for its VCs, and Inge, that I thought reached a 7x return, even though the actual VC in the deal, Helge Debel for Emerald Technology Ventures, nuanced my findings by saying it was a good exit, but not a 7x. So in the past, nobody seems to have achieved a 10x in water tech, let alone a 100x. But let's not allow the past to be a predictor of the future, and let's look forward. 100x in itself is a bit dry, so let's do a simple maths exercise. If you raise a round from Peter at a valuation of X, how much will your value need to grow every year to reach 100x 1 decade later? Well, assuming it's a linear growth, you need to achieve a bit less than 1.7x every year. And here where it gets interesting, because granted you invest in a company early enough so that your valuation discipline prices the starting point reasonably low, well, you can start to see a track record, not just a business plan, which confirms that the road to 100x exists. As Peter will reveal with a name in a minute, in year 3 of his fund, he has a little group of companies that hover around a 5x valuation, while the theoretical valuation for year 3 should only be a 2.8x and 4.7x for year 4. So still assuming that growth can be linear, Echo River Capital seems to have multiple outliers in its portfolio that are on track to beat 100x. And as Peter has reserved some dry powder to do follow-on investments on these outliers only, well, the overall performance of the fund itself could be even more drawn up by those said outliers. If it's not your first time here, you know why that matters. Proving the investment thesis in water tech to be profitable, and even very profitable at that, is the absolute best path to impact. It is what will validate the inflection point we keep hearing from week after week. It is what will reward the incredible entrepreneurs out there for all these years of hard work and sacrifices. And it is what will solve for good the ever-increasing water challenges ahead. I had a blast recording that conversation with Peter, which is probably why I went so much overboard with this introduction. So let me stop here for you to understand my enthusiasm to present it to you right after I remind you that if you like what you hear, please take this episode and share it with a colleague, a friend, your boss, or your team. Share it on LinkedIn and tag me, and I'll come personally thank you for it. Do it, and I'll meet you on the other side. Hi, Peter. Welcome to the show.
Antoine, so good to see you. Good to be with you. I've been so impressed with all of your infographics and your coverage of the water industry. We really appreciate it.
Well, I'm humbled already, so thanks a lot for that. I have a ton of stuff I'd like to cover with you today, because before being an investor, you had several lives. One where you already were kind of an investor, and then you went to the other side of the thing because you became an entrepreneur, and then you became an investor again. So it's a bit of this back and forth, which is not very common in this field. I looked up the year where you started your water company. That's 2009, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
In 2009, there were 50 deals in water tech for a total of $150 million. And that represented 2.6% of the total of clean tech investment that year. Fast forward to 2024, which is the last full year we have on record, roughly $1 billion of investments across 3 times more deals. So much more money deployed to much more projects. But that allocation of water in the global clean tech bucket went down to 0.2%. So you've been on the two ends, the entrepreneur raising money, the investor cutting the checks. How do you see that evolution from 2009 to 2024, and how can you try to influence it through Echo River Capital?
I think it's a great trajectory. The data you found is really important, that the market for water tech is growing considerably and the number of deals is increasing. It's hard to even keep up with the number of deals that I'm seeing today. So overall, I'm really encouraged that the investment community is understanding that is a great opportunity. Your data showed something like 1,000 different investors, something like that, right? Participating in water tech investing, which is amazing. And we should be cheering for these investors to continue doing that. At Echo River, what I'm trying to do is help those early stage startups and the founders to go from 0 to 1, really understand the best ways to build a company, how to set and achieve the milestones, and set themselves up to grow quickly with velocity, with an eye on profits, and eventually an exit within the timeframes that venture capitalists require. So that's what I'm trying to do with Echo River Capital. And besides that, I'm really having fun leveraging my 30 years of experience to help these founders grow.
In 2009, and I would say almost until the end of your 11-year tenure as a water entrepreneur, all that ecosystem didn't exist. They were not really dedicated water VCs, and you're part of that generation, which is actually changing it. So I wouldn't say it's a finished process. Did you do that consciously, saying, I want to be the investor I would have wanted to have as an entrepreneur, or do you just believe it's the right way to do it?
I do think it's the right way to do it. This is my deep expertise in the water sector. This is what I know, and I innately now understand the problems that we all face when we're trying to manage water in a sustainable way. How do we get on a pathway to sustainably living with water made easier through technology? That's kind of the vision for Echo River. And it made a lot of sense to bring my background as an entrepreneur and founder at WaterSmart Software to help other founders avoid some of the missteps that were common in my journey and to help them grow faster with the right types of capital and access to expertise with a global network. So I think there's something very special that I can offer as a solo GP at Echo River, but also as a former entrepreneur with a successful exit. There just aren't very many of us around. So I think I have that sort of special perspective to offer.
There's one element in your exit, which you already mentioned when you said that you want them to hold the timelines of a typical VC, is that you did it from beginning to end in more or less 10 years. I think 11 is depending how we count the beginning and the end of 2009 and 2020. Yet, when I'm editing one of these podcasts, I'm applying Parkinson's law that work tends to fill the time you allocate to it. So if I give it 2 hours, then it's going to be edited in 2 hours. If I don't give it 2 hours, then I'm on the podcast for 2 days tweaking things around. So I believe in Parkinson's law. I just have a hard time thinking it would apply to water startups as well. So is it wishful thinking to say that it's possible to fit it within 10 years, or really there's a trick to be 3 times faster than what Paul O'Callaghan's research tends to prove?
It's a really important question. And I think it comes down to sort of definitions, right? When do we start the clock is one of the questions that I ask. And so, for example, with my company, WaterSmart, yes, the company was founded legally in 2009, incorporated, but we didn't take our first investor check until 2011. So the clock for the investor doesn't start until that first round of money comes in equity. The other question is, how can we shorten the time frame for water startups to be successful, and as an investor as well? And so I'm looking for a couple of things to do. One is to differentiate between hard tech and software startups. With hard tech, we are looking for validated technology, and sometimes teams may be working on that technology for many years before the first investor check comes in. So, for example, my first investment was in Epic Cleantech, which is an on-site wastewater company. Their technology was worked on for, I believe, at least over 5 years, starting with an Israeli technology that was licensed for the US before the first round was raised. And the same is true for another investment, Active Membranes, which was a spin-out from the UCLA Carbon Nanotube Laboratory. So these are examples where the technology has been worked on for a long time, sometimes 10 years or more, before the company is established, before the first investor check comes in, and where the technology can be validated. So I'm looking for that long runway of technology development before the founders try to raise dilutive capital. They can raise grants and foundation funds and support and SBIR loans and all kinds of non-dilutive sources that are widely available today to help them get to the point where the company is well on its way to being successful before they try to dilute their own stakes with investor equity. So that's one of the ways that we can sort of shorten the time frame during that investor window that we all care about. And there are other ways to accelerate their deployment so they can increase their resource capacity by bringing in lots of partners or associates, employees, people who may not need a lot of money to contribute meaningfully to the journey of the company. So those are lots of ways to increase velocity.
You mentioned Epic Cleantech and Active Membranes. I had René Delat on the microphone a while ago, and Aaron Tartakovsky came here twice. I'm wondering, just to pick on Epic Cleantech, one element is for you to invest at the right time. And then if the product market fit is there, plus you have the regulations coming into place, which push their solution, it can do that S-curve and you can be on track for your exit window. But Epic Cleantech is also the story of a son and a father. And a son and a father might not be ready at the end of the 10 years to exit the company because it's the best for their investors. So how do you deal with that?
Sometimes people don't invest in families that start a company, but in this case, I was really excited to invest in this father-son combination because his father was a very successful, globally known engineering consultant in large buildings who already was a trusted advisor and engineer for exactly the customer type that they were pursuing. And they could utilize their company's engineering expertise to deploy the technology. So I saw it as a superpower of the company that they had this. And in fact, they're not the only parent-child investment I have. Another one is called Digital Pawnee, with the father being an engineer in India and the daughter being a Stanford-educated entrepreneur. So I'm really excited about that wastewater company also, which is a software company in India, because they have working relationships, they know each other, and in some ways, they don't have the founder risk that other teams do. They know each other, the parent and child, and they're probably not going to split apart like some teams do. Those are one of the reasons why I was excited to invest in Epic Clean Tech.
Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to quickly thank my sponsor, Simple Lab. If you're in the water industry and you're running a water quality sampling campaign or tweaking plant process performance, Simple Lab has you covered. You can easily order online from over 275 commercial labs. Simply put, Simple Lab is a one-stop shop for everything from routine testing kits to specialized analyses like PFAS or microplastics. You don't have to juggle multiple labs and complicated logistics anymore. Instead, you get a single, streamlined process for ordering kits and reviewing results. Plus, there's always a real person to talk to, so if you're tired of cobbling together lab documents and quotes and services for each new requirement, or you just want to try a new way for more efficient testing of water samples, check out Simple Lab. They're all about making water quality testing, well, simple. So head to their website, the link is in the description, line up the tests you need, hit order, and let them handle the rest. Thanks Simple Lab for supporting my work. Check them out to support me, and back to me. So I mentioned how the ecosystem is building. You're clearly one of the most active in that ecosystem.
24 investments now, yeah.
You're just close tie with Bertelsmann Ventures, and I would put in the same bracket PureTerra Ventures, even if they do less moves than you do, but you are the three which are really above really the rest of the pack. How do you interact with other dedicated VCs? Do you see them as competition? Would you co-invest with them? Would you collaborate and pass up decks because that might not be for you, but might be for Tom, or might be for Nick or Job? Or how do you interact with them?
I think one of the best things about water tech investing is that it's a team sport. And I really pride myself on the relationships that we've established among ourselves between PureTerra and Emerald and Burnt Island and other investment firms who have dedicated intent to invest in the water space. I think we do share deals. We share expertise. Part of it is I probably invest a little bit earlier than most other investors. Right now, the last few investments have been spin-outs from universities. So the technologies are validated, but they're pre-commercial. Most other investors are waiting for commercialization and commercial traction and revenue. So I think that I am hoping that they will invest in the companies that get to from 0 to 1, get to $1 million in revenue, and go on to raise a Series C and Series A from those other firms. And I think that they're looking for deal flow. I can be a bit of a scout on the edge of the horizon, and hopefully I can bring in and develop and mentor founders with companies that they're interested in investing in down the road. So I do think there's a synergy here, and we do try to help each other to a large extent.
The fact that you look at this spin out of university, is it linked to the fact that you're close to UCLA, or is it total coincidence, or you had good experience and you thought, oh, those are the guys I want to support?
As I've developed as an investor, I think my intuition has gotten stronger. And as you pointed out in your data, more and more investors are coming into the space. I've found myself to carve out a niche going earlier and earlier because I can find founders who really can utilize the skills and the backgrounds that I can offer to them in a way to help them go to market. So I think it's a mutual interest of going earlier, but it's also as I've developed more relationships with universities and they've developed more established technology transfer offices, those opportunities to find founders and to encourage postdocs in these universities to commercialize the technologies they've worked on in their academic careers is getting more exciting. For example, Crew Carbon is a spin out from Yale University, my alma mater. It became an amazing wastewater treatment technology using enhanced rock weathering to reduce direct emissions of gases from wastewater treatment as one example. And then one of the most recent investments has been in a company called Page Technologies, which stands for Printed Agricultural and Environmental Technologies, which utilizes licensed technologies developed by the founders at UC Berkeley and at CU Boulder. And now the company is based at CU Boulder, and both founders are based in Boulder and are using printed technologies to detect real-time nutrients in soils, which is a huge revolutionary advantage when thinking about how to apply fertilizers and how much to apply fertilizers to soils. So that's another example of looking for the diamonds in the rough and sort of going earlier and identifying companies and technologies that are brand new to the water space.
In terms of deal structure, that's really a curiosity question. When you're cutting a check to those spin-outs, do you cut a check alone, or do you already in those very, very early stage team up to make an investment round that you might be leading, but others will be with you?
I try to participate with other investors when possible, but there's always an exception. So when a company absolutely needs that next couple dollars to validate something or to prove the commercial market, I am occasionally willing to write a check alone, but it's much safer to come in with a significant amount of money that helps companies to identify and achieve the next set of milestones. That's really what we're after as investors, to help them achieve milestones that help them prove their market, validate their technology, and hire the next key person on the team.
I think we need to explain your investment thesis, which is summarized with 3 Ds, if I recall right: digitize, decarbonize, decentralize. How do you come up with those 3 Ds?
One is around understanding the overall needs of the water space today. With 30 years of experience, I innately, in a way, know or have intuition about what needs to happen. In some cases, I was a practitioner of a lot of these technologies and was manually doing a lot of the work that today's companies are automating. So, for example, one thing is that, water is analog, right? These are atoms, not bits, but we need to convert atoms to bits in order to understand the stocks and the flows and the quality of water. Without that, we can't do a good job of managing our water systems and achieving sustainability. So that's naturally something that we need. And we're only in the second inning, I would say, of our digitization journey of understanding water. There's so many emerging contaminants. Take, micro and nanoplastics, for example, or PFAS, where we don't yet have the technology to understand the water quality in real time. I think AI and machine learning have only accelerated or emphasized how important digitizing water data really is. The second was around decarbonization. And one of the interesting things about understanding where emissions comes from is so much of it is actually direct emissions. There is, of course, the secondary emissions of using energy or emissions from creating energy to move heat or treat water. There's also a lot of emissions from wastewater treatment, like Crew Carbon is addressing, from irrigated agriculture, where nitrous oxides are being emitted, methane from peat soils and wetlands. These direct gaseous emissions are fast, they're fast acting, and they're much more powerful than carbon dioxide. Methane, in some cases, can be up to 80 times more powerful than CO2. So we really have to get a grip on what's happening in irrigated agriculture and in our wetlands to understand. And one company that I'm really excited about is called Open Hydro, which are run by 2 women engineers who are going after monitoring and reporting and managing on emissions from reservoirs. Reservoirs directly emit about 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions on a CO2 equivalent basis. And they think that they can help reduce those emissions by a third to half for a reservoir. That's significant. And then a third, in terms of decentralizing water and wastewater treatment, really it's just understanding physics. Like the 20th century centralized water and wastewater systems are going to collapse under their own weight. We already have 260,000 water main breaks every year, and it costs $1 or $2 million per mile to replace these pipes. We're not on a sustainable trajectory to replace and repair these pipes. So new cities, new industries, new residential housing developments, 21st century architecture and engineering will be done on the edge in these decentralized environments because the centralized systems of yesterday are not capable of building this out or treating the new emerging contaminants. They're not designed for that. And in fact, when they're being asked to implement new water treatment systems for new contaminants, they're pushing back and they're actually suing the federal government for the unfunded mandates. For example, PFAS. They sued the EPA last year to avoid having to implement PFAS detection and destruction technology to human health's detriment. So look, they're saying they can't do it. Let's listen to them. Let's believe them. So let's move to a more decentralized water and wastewater treatment future. So those are the reasons for the 3Ds.
I'm fully on board. I have to be the devil's advocate here, so
Please.
it's my role.
Yeah.
Digitization, I clearly see it in a business equation. There's something out there which has to be managed, and there are so many drivers. I'm not disagreeing on anything. So let's say that makes full sense to me. Decentralized, you're preaching to the church. I love the idea. I discussed that several times with Aaron on the microphone and with others. So not discussing that either. So my question is on decarbonize, because on decarbonize, it sounds like the absolute thing a B Corp would do, and you're a B Corp.
Yes.
It sounds like the absolute right thing to do. I just have a hard time to see the business equation in it, because you're doing the right thing, you're reducing the carbon emissions, you're making something which has intangible and tangible value, but the kind of value, which suffers from the wrong bucket symptom. Like you're making something which is good for everybody, but if it's good for everybody, then why should somebody in particular be paying for it? And that is something which can be tricky in terms of establishing the business value for all the startups which are in this space of carbon capture, carbon impact, and all of that. So as a VC, it's super impressive and also quite surprising to see you make it one of the 3 pillars of your thesis. Am I out of touch?
You're definitely not out of touch. But let me say or repeat a phrase you've probably heard before, which is it's not about the water, at least not all the time. And in the case of decarbonization, it's about greenhouse gas emissions. We have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and fast. And if water and human management of water is responsible for 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions, we have to get a handle on that urgently. The next 10 years are critical time period for us to reduce emissions, especially of fast-acting gases like methane and nitrous oxide. So when we think about companies like Crew Carbon, they're not asking wastewater treatment facilities to pay for that. They are monetizing their technology through voluntary carbon credits or the voluntary carbon market. They are creating a source of carbon sequestration in the controlled wastewater treatment process, which creates a high value, highly credible, high quality carbon credit that is already being sold on an offtake agreement to Frontier. So they just inked a 6-year, I believe it's $32 million contract offtake agreement. So they have proof to valorize or monetize carbon credits. And I think one of the things that more companies can do is think about how to translate water management into other financial instruments or elements that people do care about that are not about the water. Water is an input into all of human endeavor, right? It's connected to all those other industries. So how can we connect the dots to monetize or valorize those other things that water is helping to create? And in some cases, that is greenhouse gas emission credits.
So to put it in my words, what's supporting your thesis here is that you are building upon a monetization scheme that already exists with the carbon credits. And some of the initiatives out there currently developed for the tokenization of water impact, the natural asset classes, which are now trading on Wall Street. I mean, if all those add up, it will open more paths to monetization, as long as it's not the actual treatment plant which has to invest for it, but you have another type of funding mechanism. There's no reason to not treat it like any kind of business which has this added value of the urgency, because yes, the water sector is a big carbon emitter, so we would be well-versed to take our part in solving the challenge.
That's right. And we always are asking for where's the pain at the customer and what's the benefit? And customers always want to improve their bottom line. So can the implementation or deployment of a product or service increase or improve their bottom line? And if so, then I think there's an exciting business there. And if not, if it's just a cost, then I don't think that that type of service is ever going to take off. We're not going to find a product market fit because it won't exist.
Let me pause here for a second to ask you a question. Have you ever heard of a membrane that refuses to break? It sounds unusual, but it's true. Meet Bluefoot Membranes, a Belgian company that has developed the first and only unbreakable membrane specifically designed for MBR, if you're new here, membrane bioreactor applications. This technology is setting a new standard in wastewater treatment. Water engineers and industry experts have tested this membrane, and no matter how much they pull and twist, the membrane holds strong. Now, it's not just about membranes, it's also about an award-winning and passionate team that doesn't take impossible as an answer. The people at Bluefoot Membranes are driven by a mission to make wastewater reuse the new standard, united by a shared purpose to leave a blue footprint on the world. So yes, they manufacture cool membranes, but they also push the boundaries of what's possible in MBR technologies. To learn more about them, check the link to their website in the description. A big thanks to Bluefoot Membranes for sponsoring this episode, and back to me. Which nevertheless brings me back to the number I gave you in the beginning, which was the only negative between 2009 and 2024, which is the share that water represents in climate tech, which went down. So yes, the overall cake is growing, but our share of the cake is shrinking. And in your impact report, you were saying it's 2% of climate tech which goes to water. In my own calculation, but I mean, the truth is probably in between, it's 0.2%. My question is not about the number itself. My question is about, first, should we be concerned that it's so small? And second, if really we are talking of a sector which is 10% of the carbon impact, a sector which has arguably a strong influence on all the others in terms of the critical path it becomes on many industry verticals, shouldn't it be more of a climate tech concern than it is today?
I think it's an interesting question. And water, as I mentioned before, is sort of an input into all human endeavors. And I think as water is a lens onto climate, but it's also an input into agriculture, energy production, industrial production, transportation. There's so many other ways we can think about water investing beyond climate tech. So I think it's a limited view, and I don't think in the end, it's just one particular angle on the question, but not definitive.
You mentioned my stats of the investors in the sector. There are 1,489 investors that cut a check in water over the past 6 years, publicly, so probably more behind the scenes. 84% of those people don't cut a second check or haven't done it yet. To which I see two explanations. Whether they do water and it's a box they have to tick, and once the box is ticked, why tick it a second time? It's ticked. Or they don't make money on that investment, and why would you repeat an investment that doesn't make you money? Is there a positive explanation I'm missing, or is it maybe a concern that only 16% of investors cut a second check?
I think it's a concern only to the extent that there are so many great opportunities in the water sector today. There are more great companies to invest in than there are investors willing to invest today. So I think that the need is there, and we want to encourage more investors to come in, right? Jump in the pool and play with us, right? One of the questions might be for you is, what's the next type of research you can do to support other investors participating, and maybe to do a look back exercise and see what type of returns have these investors gotten? What have been the outcomes of these investments? I think I haven't seen that type of data before. So if I may be so bold as to suggest a new pathway of research for you to come up with demonstrated quantitative rationales for increased participation by investors who clearly have an appetite or a thirst for at least doing one water investment, and they can be demonstrated to be a successful pathway for more.
I would have a two-step answer to that. The first is that I did that research of looking at who's made money in that sector, because I was trapped between Tom Ferguson and Brian Iverson. Brian Iverson writing an article saying that venture capital cannot succeed in water, and Tom Ferguson building at the time his investment thesis upon the fact that Brian was wrong. And what I kind of demonstrated is that they are both right. There is no public track record of a company that would have done a 10x for an early stage VC. The closest to it is Emerald with Inga, according to my data. And I was suggesting that they might have done it, but Helge Debel jumped in and said, no, we made a good return, but not a 10x. So according to my findings so far, there is no 10x in water. And when I say that they are both right, is that 10x is the threshold that Brian had put as if you do 10x, then you're successful. I do believe that in water, 10x is maybe not realistic and maybe not the target. Also for another reason, which is that water companies tend to not die as much as other companies. So you maybe don't need as much 10x in your portfolio to compensate for the zeros which you have on the companies that die out, because they most probably will not die out. They might be illiquid, but they don't die out. But before I go to my second explanation, I think you have an even more ambitious target, because I heard you in different interviews say that you believe that a 100x is possible in that sector. So is 10x the threshold? Is 100x achievable? What is success?
I would not do an investment without having a belief that every company have at least a 10x opportunity, and that at least one or two of the companies in the portfolio, of which there are 24, can achieve a 100x outcome. As evidence, I would point to, I think, at least 3 companies in the portfolio, and this is only year 3 of Echo River's fund number 1. At least 3 companies have achieved at least a 5x increase in valuation already. So if we're just looking for a 10x return in 10 years, I think Echo River is well on its way to having multiple companies achieving a 10x exit outcome. So evidence rules, and that's the data that I have for you today. I hope in a year we'll have even more companies achieving that increase in valuation in a mark-to-market way. I do think there are opportunities for 100x outcomes. That's one of the reasons why I like to invest so early in the life of a company. If we invest at, let's say, a $5 million valuation, and we quote, only need to achieve a $500 million exit valuation, right? For that 100x outcome. I think that's eminently doable. We've seen multiple companies in the water space have billion-dollar outcomes already. So if Echo River, we maintain valuation discipline and investing with validated technology at a pre-commercial stage with an exceptional team and customers that have a need for their product or service, this is the equation that I think will be able to deliver individual companies that are achieving 10 to 100x and have one or more fund returning exits for the portfolio.
One important thing in that equation is the exits themselves, because you need to have the exit paths open, because valuation is great, but if nobody's ready to pay the price, it's a bit more tricky. And usually the paths which are looked at are a major re-entering water, and which will have to snap some stuff to build something. And I say a major re-entering water, but it can be another ski on water, someone with a mandate to amalgamate a portfolio pretty fast and snapping cool companies left and right. That's one. The second is the traditional path. You need to go to the Xylem, Veolia, Ecolab of this world and pitch to them. But that means you need to be in their target window, which is 50 to, 200 million, which is also the desert in companies. There are not so many companies which are in that revenue bracket. And the third is IPO. And IPO doesn't have that much of a track record in the water sector. Do you see different avenues? I don't know, a SPAC, whatever fits. What's your view on that?
I do think that most exits will come from M&A or acquisitions by larger companies rather than IPO. That said, I really think about placing bets on my quote bingo card, right? And thinking about maybe a 3-dimensional matrix or bingo card or Rubik's Cube might be where you have different axes. You might have a different vertical or / industry, a different technology type, and a different geo market, let's say. We at Echo River started placing bets, right, across all these different dimensions so that it expands the potential universe of acquirers in 10 years. So that could be a beverage company. It could be an agricultural technology company. It could be, one of the multinational water companies you mentioned, of course, or it could be a real estate development company like Epic Cleantech, for example, right? Sells into the large commercial and residential buildings in downtown environments. Why not, one of the large commercial property owners in the world? There are hundreds, right, of real estate property ownerships out there that might like an Epic Cleantech, or a beverage company that might like to acquire an Airflow, which is a new investment of Echo River. So I think that there are lots of potential acquirers if we expand the universe of possibilities beyond the usual suspects. That said, I also want to mention one other element that I think is important around why the past is not going to look like the future. So if one was a weather forecaster or a reservoir water manager, historically one would look at stochastic data, which is to create a model of the future that looked like the past. But we're at an inflection point, a moment in time where stochastic analysis does not fit the future anymore. And we have to create a new world because the pace of change is accelerating. That means the pace of solutions needs to accelerate as well. And I do think that there will be an increasing appreciation for and valuation of companies that are creating the water-related solutions of the future in a way that we can't quite envision just yet.
You lead me to the second half of the answer I wanted to give you, which is part an answer, part a question to you. It's about the literacy of the investors in water. If you look at first-time investors, when they come typically from around where you're at, they invest in atmospheric water generation or they invest in direct lithium extraction. And nothing negative about those two fields. I'm a big fan on both ends. I'm a cheerleader for this sector, but there is an over-representation of those specific categories within the first-time investors. And where this connects to my illiteracy element, which honestly, there are so many fields I have no clue about. So I say that with absolutely no negativity. They just don't know the fields I happen to know a bit about, and I don't know the fields in which they are the best in class. So when I had another of your portfolio company on that microphone with Julie Blissmullen from Clarity, she explained how for her funding round, she had a very simple screening question. She was asking investors if they know about PFAS. If they didn't know the word PFAS, they were out. And you would think that's a weak screening because, come on, PFAS is pretty much in the news, but nevertheless, it was a good screening. I'm thinking that when influencer investors like you, like Burnt Island, like the specialists, are attracted towards a company that serves as a validation for others to think, oh, it's good. The right guy who understands what they do have done the due diligence. If they bet on that company, we can bet on that company too. And as you are a limited amount of specialists and you can't be by definition on all the deals that don't have one of the specialist insights are a bit more of a coin flip. How much of that exaggeration is true in terms of relatively low literacy in water of the investment community?
I do think that going to the pre-seed and seed stage requires some literacy of the sector. And that's one of the reasons why founders appeal to me or invite me to be part of their journey is because they don't have to translate water to an investor, which is very time consuming. As a former entrepreneur and fundraiser, I can tell you, educating investors, super time consuming. Sometimes you never get over that hump. So I appreciate what founders do to have a test and to some degree. And I do think that that's one of the reasons why it's a team sport. It's a collaboration where different investors have different capabilities and different elements of expertise, and we can share them. We can't be all-knowing. There's never such thing as perfect information, but we can certainly help each other. And to the extent that investors are looking to Echo River to help interpret or translate why Echo River thinks a company is going to be successful, I'm willing to spend the time with them to help those investors understand when they're going to have other capabilities that I don't because they're playing in a different space, different series. They might be Series A growth stage investor, for example, or they might have a particular geo-market expertise. So we can put our heads together to make the best judgment we can and help these companies to the best of our abilities, which is what it's all about, right? We want these companies and the founders to be successful because the world needs their solutions. So let's help them.
We know the world needs their solution. My question is, does the world always understand that it has the problem which will be solved by the solution and that they have the solution? Because before appreciating the solution, you need to understand the problem. And I'm not sure about that segue. You can stop me here. But you have been advocating against Donald Trump's re-election, and he is known for creating water narratives which don't really exist, like the stupid Californians that let the rivers flow to the sea, which he has repeated so many times that now people believe him. And if these kinds of narratives become stronger than the truth, then it's even more difficult to bring across that you will need new solutions for new problems when the solution is just to return to what we did in the 60s, which were the happy times. So you cannot compete with the president of the United States in terms of access to crafting the narrative. So how do you cope in that new post-truth, let's say, environment?
That is quite a segue. Antoine, I have to hand it to you. So, I think the interesting thing to me, and one of the reasons why I write about in my monthly blog post about the new administration, is that they do have an interest in water. And for whatever reason, maybe it's because Trump was a real estate developer and water is a big problem to solve for a new development. They have to find water to supply their buildings, and efficiency is a problem, and plumbing and fixtures and so on. So maybe it's practical in that regard. And if he's a golf course owner, maybe he has to find water to irrigate the golf course. I don't know. For whatever reason, he has water on the brain. And I think it's worth understanding, why is that? And maybe taking advantage of his interest in water to let him know that there are smart ways of managing water down the road, and there are ways that we shouldn't be doing that. So obviously, his megaphone is larger than anyone's, and no use competing. But I will say that the federal government does a really good job of managing water across 17 different departments or agencies: EPA, Department of Interior, Army Corps of Engineers, Natural Resource Conservation Service, USDA. I mean, it goes on and on and on. There is no Department of Water at the federal government like there is for the Department of Energy. And perhaps that is something that we do need. Maybe we do need a cross-cutting Department of Water for the federal government. Maybe as a disruptor in chief, he wants to establish a Department of Water. I think that would serve all of us well, because right now it's a very distributed decision-making environment, and we could be more cohesive, comprehensive, and thoughtful about how water cuts across, as I said, all of human endeavor. Why shouldn't there be a Department of Water at the U.S. federal level?
I was following a pitch of the EPA last week in Washington. It was a sad pitch because it was a bit of a pitch saying, hey, it might be the last, so enjoy it while it lasts. But yeah, you're right. There are 60 agencies in the US with a mandate for water. So if one disappears, 59 are left. There's positive in all of that as well, I guess. The reason I was bringing that up is twofold. The first is when mechanisms like the SBIR are put into jeopardy, that's exactly the type of stuff that the companies you're investing in would leverage in their early stages. So I guess it impacts their path to market and impacts their timelines. And the other element is I spoke with a PE fund in New York last year who told me that they would be jumping in water and investing in water the day it makes Bloomberg. And maybe you're right. Maybe Donald Trump being so obsessed with water, it will make Bloomberg. And then in the end, by whatever way, it's still a positive. So,
I think one of the elements that you're touching on, SBIRs, for example, is the importance of non-dilutive funding for startups, especially in the hard tech or deep tech space. SBIRs are a great source of that. USDA, Natural Resource Conservation Service, there are a lot of areas where there is non-dilutive funding available for startups working on solutions that can improve our energy efficiency, can improve our agricultural production, irrigation efficiency, reduce emerging contaminants in the environment, like micro and nanoplastics, for example. So there are great opportunities for the federal government to provide these non-dilutive, and I think those should be protected and expanded.
I have a question which this time I'm sure you can't answer, but I'll try nevertheless. You mentioned that you have some specific outliers in your portfolio which you see as good prospects for hitting that 100x. Can you name at least one of them?
So we've already named one of them, which is Epic Cleantech. And I do grade on a quarterly basis every company on a letter grade, A, B, C, D, F. I hate to say it, but one that's maybe blinking out. So 23 of the 24 companies are still operating. Only the A's are the ones that are the winners that are deserving of follow-on investment. And I only can, afford to invest. I've reserved half of the investable capital for follow-on investment, and only the top 3 to 5 will get the allocations of that follow-on investment. So that's really how the portfolio construction works. Make several dozen bets across the space and then double down on the winners. Epic Cleantech is definitely one of them. It's already a 5x increase in valuation. They just completed their Series B fundraise. They're gaining traction across the country with large commercial real estate developers, and it's only going to accelerate. So they're already seen as the leader in on-site water recycling, and I'm really excited to see where Epic Cleantech is going to go in the future as distributed, decentralized treatment really becomes the standard.
How many A companies do you have?
Currently, I believe there are 4 out of 24, and then it's distributed among the rest. So, things change, right? And I definitely follow the English Premier League, so I'm a fan of league tables, and it's fun to see how they're doing, how to support them best. And I always ask them, what can I do to support them along the way? One of the things that's really important for investors like me is to maintain clear line of sight and transparent communication to see what's going on inside those companies, to have better information about understanding not how they're doing, but how to help them. So I always request and suggest that founders send out monthly or at least quarterly investor updates to all of us. It's also a great muscle to build, to have that communication. And it's also, I think, one of the most important and reliable indicators of a founder's success is having regular disciplined communication with the people who cheer them on the loudest, which aren't investors like me.
Cheer them on the loudest, but you might have sometimes to be also the driver of bad news and to show them what they don't want to see. So how do you juggle the two sides of that? And would you have an example where you had to step in and to bring them back on track?
One of the things I try to do when I first invest is to be a mentor. Sometimes that may be 6 to 12 months even before I invest. I may sort of take a founder under my wing and help them a bit to get them to their first investment round. One example is a company, I won't name them, but they might have a really interesting technology that's new to the market and they have excellent results, but they're not quite sure how to sell it. So I encourage this particular company to productize their technology in a box or something that can sit on a shelf. People can grab and understand how it's going to be useful. In this case, it's for agricultural application where someone can go into, let's say, a Ewing irrigation shop, right? And understand how that's going to be useful in their greenhouse or in their field. How do you productize that? Even go through that mental exercise of thinking about who that customer is and what's going to motivate them to buy it. And instead of doing like a bespoke, customized solution for that particular customer, think about the broader category and go through an exercise of creating a product and testing that product. I'm a big fan of experimenting and A/B testing. Every communication that a founder should do should be a test. Understand, should we do this or that? And how do you build on that and iterate over time? That's really a very useful skill. And I think this quandary that sometimes founders get into is like they create this amazing technology, but they haven't quite figured out how to sell it or find the customer, find that product market fit where the customer need is. I think that intersection is helpful in thinking about how to offer a product that centralizes that technology is a great exercise to go through.
You mentioned your dry powder reserve, which you have for your A players for their follow-on rounds. Do you still have some space in your fund for new early stage companies, or is it all for this one and they might have to wait for the next one?
We're just about done with new investments out of Fund 1. We may have room for 2 or 3 more over the next few months, but we're largely done. It's an exciting place to be. Having spent now, this is the 3rd year of operation for Echo River. So that was always designed to have an investable period of 3 years and then 7 years of supporting and doing follow-on investments into those winners.
So that means the exit windows opens in 2030, 2031?
Something like that, yes. But of course, sooner is better. And my LPs would love nothing more than to get a check with something distributed before then. So yes, something sooner, it would be better. But in the investable window is 10 years, plus we have 2 one-year options at the end, just fairly standard in the venture capital industry. But sooner is better, and that certainly helps the calculation on the internal rate of return as well.
You mentioned 24 companies in the portfolio, 23 left, 2 more, let's say 25. Out of these 25, how many zero are you ready to take?
It's not uncommon for a third to half of them to be zeros. And really, when we think about the portfolio construction, it's really only the winners that provide a return of capital to the LPs. And that's what we're looking for.
But to an extent that it becomes a KPI. Because let me explain where I'm coming from. I never wish anyone to become a zero and to crash. That's not my aim. It's just when I interviewed Michael Middleware on that microphone, he was representing 30-ish companies which were up for sales. The last time I spoke with him, he had 150 companies up for sales within his portfolio. The rationale is that a lot of his companies are successful, profitable from day one, and nice growth year on year since the beginning. They don't reach a size and they don't get a growth trajectory, which is interesting for an M&A move because they are too small. And still, people at some point want to retire. And if they just retire and close the company, then all they've built for 30 years of entrepreneurship is just going with the flow. So there would be a thesis to say, you're going to die one way or the other as a company. You'd rather die early but try to achieve greatness than take the risk of dying of old age.
I think your point is an interesting one. And I would say it depends on the perspective and the role of the person that we're talking about. As an entrepreneur for myself at WaterSmart Software, I devoted 10 years of my life to that company. And I really wanted to see it continue in its life because I think WaterSmart Software offered something of value to drinking water utilities. And it was acquired by a company that continues to invest in it and sell it and support it. And that's meaningful to me as a founder, that our vision lives on. Even though it wasn't a home run, I'd say it was a double, in terms of how successful it was in baseball terms. That was fulfilling for me. From an investor perspective, it may not have been fulfilling. It was not the 100x home run, and it was not a fund returner for the investors. But I think it's still important depending on the perspective, if these companies and the founders are creating something of value to support the sustainability of water, then I think it's important that they find a home and continue to be offered.
So you wouldn't proactively drive them to the ground by pushing them to be 100x. That's not within your philosophy.
Well, it's not necessarily within my capability. I encourage the founders to think for 100x, like what does it take? If they don't think about it that way, perhaps their ambition is not big enough because it really comes down to the founder's ambition, creativity, and drive. And if they have that, they're going to envision a way, a pathway to potentially get there. Not that it's going to be successful every time, of course it's not, but they should have a way to envision a pathway for that type of outcome. And if they don't, then it's not probably my place to invest in them either. I'm just not in the role of investing in a double or a triple. That's just not the role of a venture capitalist. It's not to say that the company shouldn't exist or can't find other types of financing. So there's plenty of companies out there that are bootstrapped, that are built on credit cards, that have non-dilutive funding, that get commercial loans. Most companies are built that way. But in the venture industry, we are built on the chance to bet on, a 100x company or a 1000x company. Why limit it? So, that's what we're looking for.
I have a closing question for you in that deep dive, which is we discussed the 2030 horizon, which is hopefully your exit window is already open, but at least it's at that stage that it's really expecting to getting traction. If we do a backwards engineering of that, what needs to happen in the next 12 months to keep you on track?
Can I give you 3?
Sure.
So I'm going to break them down by 3 areas of water. One is quality, one is quantity, and one is the emissions, decarbonization. These are 3 things I think need to happen. One is we need more epidemiology, public health studies of understanding how emerging contaminants in our water supply are affecting human health. Today, we are seeing coincidences of increasing incidence of cancer in younger people, and we are seeing an increase in more emerging contaminants like PFAS, micro and nanoplastics, and biopharmaceuticals. But we don't yet have the data to support or to link increases of these contaminants in our water supply with health outcomes. And that's what I think we need to do right now to get a handle on our drinking water quality. The second is around water quantity. And I want industrial companies to think about ways not just to improve their water efficiency, but I want them to adopt new ways of what I call dewatering industry. How do we remove water altogether from industrial processes? Is water really, truly necessary to grow or to build or to develop that next new technology? So that's one thing I want industrialists to think about, dewatering their process. And then in the greenhouse gas area, we really need to move quickly and powerfully to reduce direct emissions of gases from water-related activities. We already have a lot of emphasis and focus on decarbonizing electricity and power industry, but we do not really have a handle on those direct emissions from water-related activities that we've talked about already around irrigated agriculture, wastewater treatment, and management of reservoirs. This is an undiscovered, untouched, underinvested area that is crucial if we're going to, get to our carbon goals.
I guess it's also the untold story of SDG 6, which is that when you have so much of the words wastewater, which is simply returned to the environment and treated, it doesn't mean it's just going to sit here untouched. It's going to turn naturally into cleaner water and methane and stuff like that. So we're creating emissions also when we are not solving a basic human right. There's unfortunately a huge way up on that end. I have a question on your epidemiology element, because you say we don't have the data yet. We have only the beginning of the data. I am sometimes under the impression that we have the data, but that we don't necessarily want to act upon that data. And in order to not go into the always touchy topic of PFAS, I have a bit of a lighter one, because I interviewed a gentleman in New York 2 years ago who told me, there are epidemiologic studies in Texas that show that if there's lithium in your drinking water, it reduces the suicide rate and the violence rate, and basically all the crime statistics go down. And I listened to him politely and I thought, okay, I'm going to take half an hour when I'm back home and I'm going to debunk what he told me, because it's nonsense. If really that was happening, we would have lithiated all waters for decades. And he's right. Those studies exist, are repeated in many countries, Japan, Austria, United States, different parts of the United States, and so far and so on. So the studies prove that a certain level of lithium, I'm not saying we should give to everybody the therapeutic doses of lithium, that's really not about that. We're talking microdosing of lithium, has a proven positive health effect. And then I don't want you to think I'm, as a French, obsessing over the Trump administration, but what's next? They will remove fluoridation of water, which is proven to have a positive health effect. So do we really not have the epidemiologic data, or are we not ready to act upon it?
There is a lack of political will and budget to some degree. There are hundreds of thousands of chemicals that have been created industrially, and how many have been regulated by the EPA in the US? Only about 80 families of chemicals. So yes, we are aware of hundreds of thousands, and yet we only have the political will or the budget to manage and regulate 80 of them. And we don't even know what the epidemiology is when we start combining all these chemicals.
And the cocktail effect, yeah.
These exposures across, what we ingest or inhale or through contact. Human health, I think, is one of the important vectors in creating behavior change. People really care about themselves. And if they understand what's happening with themselves and how their risks are being managed or increased through different exposures, maybe that will create the political will. And if we create the political will, then the budget to address our exposures in the water and the air. All the politicians say they're supportive of clean air and water, but we don't have a lot of the political will or the budget to tackle some of these things. And I think that the epidemiological studies necessary to connect the dots still need to be funded and accomplished.
I could trap you for another hour with another bunch of questions, because it's really fascinating how you're bringing clarity to that question salad. Thanks a lot for the time you took in that deep dive. To round it off, I have the rapid fire questions.
It's time for the rapid fire questions.
My first question is, what is the toughest challenge in your opinion for a water tech startup?
Validating customer needs. Founders really need to go out and do 100 different customer interviews to find what customers are going to be willing to pay for that is a pain point or a need. Not a nice to have or a want to have, but something they need today that will help them do their jobs better and save money or generate more revenue.
What would be your best single piece of advice for the founders and managers of the about 1,000 early-stage water startups?
Spend time thinking about how to develop a one-to-many sales strategy. So many customers in water today are idiosyncratic. Selling to one doesn't mean they're going to be successful at selling to the second. So it's best to sell once and then let that partner sell to all of their trusted relationships.
What's the drop of knowledge you wish more investors knew about the water sector?
They should know that they should manage their water or the water will manage them. We're in an era when unmanaged water risk will come back to haunt customers and investors. So it's better for them to understand their water risk and manage it themselves before they're inundated or swamped or flooded away.
What was your most unexpected partnership and what did it bring you?
I would say collaboration with my other co-investors in the water space, like Burnt Island and Pure Terra and Emerald. They have become valued partners and friends, and it's great to pick up the phone and have collaboration and collegiality, in an era when I'm a solo GP, we're all working in different cities, and yet we have a sort of a virtual water cooler, and I really appreciate that.
Super short, profitability or growth?
Growth.
I would have been so surprised if you said profitability. Come on, you're VCs, huh? What's the next profile you'll hire, or will you hire someone?
An associate. I often hire a summer associate and then someone throughout the academic year in graduate school. So we're looking for our next summer associate now.
Right now?
Right now.
Do you have like a job opening we can share in the show notes?
Yes, I will.
So then look at the show notes and you might be the next summer associate at Echo River Capital. Opening new markets or doubling down on the current ones?
Doubling down on the current markets. We want to see, share of wallet or spend for companies that are opening up a new market. Being an evangelist is something that I've done personally, and it's possible, but it takes a long time.
What is now for you personally that tool that nobody speaks about, but you cannot live without?
I use Roam Research every day as a note-taking tool and as a second brain. It's like a hyperlinked note-taking tool, and I can always find prior conversations there. It's really useful.
I'll test it out. What's the single piece of insight your ideal customer profile needs to hear right now? I mean, ideal customer profile in your case would be probably ideal company prospect.
Yeah, I think a founder. So what I would like to see from them, the advice I would have is when we have our first conversation, be ready to show me that your technology is validated, that you've proven that there's a customer who needs what you're offering, and that you're pre-commercial. You're ready to go, but not yet generating commercial scale revenue.
What are you desperately needing and want to raise an open call for right now?
I'm looking for companies that offer cooling technology for data centers that does not use water. So going back to this conversation around how do we de-water technology, looking for data centers that don't use any water at all or very, very little.
It's funny you mentioned that because I remember having that conversation with Upmanulal in New York last year where he was just desperate looking at those water numbers of data centers and saying, have they never heard of ground-based water heat exchangers? I mean, closed loop, no water consumption, and I didn't have the time yet to dig into the technicalities or the financials as to why people don't go into that if that's the solution. But it sounds like, yeah, it's a thirsty industry. And if you have something differentiated there, they very probably, given they all have a pledge to be water neutral or water positive by 2030, they would sure represent a great market.
Or many of them are looking to become, like you say, water neutral, water positive. They have water replenishment goals and they're creating a new market for water offsets that companies like Waterplan and Swan Systems are, the beneficiaries of. They're offering water offsets today, but it'd be better if we went upstream and we de-watered the industry altogether.
You de-water them, they're at zero. If they want to be positive, they still need the offset. So you can have the two.
Yes, exactly.
What can and should I do for you?
Well, we mentioned it before, but I really think you should go back and survey those 1,500 investors who invested one time in the water industry and prove to them that they should invest more.
That's a Sisyphean but interesting task. I'll do my best. Peter, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast. If people want to follow up with you, what's the best place to connect with you?
My email address is peter@echorivercap.com. You can also visit at www.echorivercap.com. If you're a founder looking to raise money, we have an application page at echorivercap.com/apply. So, Antoine, this has been a real pleasure. Great conversation. Thank you for all you do to help us better understand the water investment industry.
My great pleasure. As always, all the links you just mentioned are in the description. So if you're listening to this, go check it out. If you're a founder, check the special link and talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon, Antoine.
Thanks for listening to Don't Waste Water. This podcast was brought to you by GF Piping Systems. Loved this episode? Head over to Apple Podcasts to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. See you next time.